Here in part 2, let's talk about hypotheses on the origin of life. Our hypotheses on the origin of life evolve as we acquire new information. Our understanding is based on observations from rocks and experiments, and as we get more understanding, it can reshape how we view, how we think about the origins of Earth. So let us first start by exploring the three primary hypotheses for the origins of life on Earth. The first hypothesis came from Miller and Urey. Miller was a graduate student, and Urey was the professor at the University of Chicago. They hypothesized that the primordial atmosphere consisted of a number of very simple gases, such as water, methane, ammonia, diatomic hydrogen. There was no oxygen present. So they conducted an experiment in which they put those gases together in a spark chamber and used a spark to simulate lightning. They then condensed the products that were coming out and collected the molecules here and continued this in a circular fashion with a bubbler system, adding gases along the way. And what they observed was something really quite spectacular. Amino acids were found to be formed, lipids, nucleic acids, sugars, other organic molecules. All the basic building blocks of life could be achieved here in this liquid medium. There was no solid, it was only a liquid medium. That stood as one of the leading hypotheses for the origin of life until we began to explore a number of meteorites that arrived on Earth. Here's a picture of the Murchison meteorite. And what they found was that amino acids, DNA bases, formaldehyde, fatty acid, sugars, all the same compounds that could be formed using a spark in the Miller-Urey experiment could also be found in this meteorite coming here, landing on Earth. In this case, the gases were interacting with ultraviolet and other cosmic rays that then provided the energy to form these fundamental building blocks. There has not been any sign of life on any of these meteorites so far. In the 1980s, a third hypothesis emerged. We began to understand more about continental plates and how the continents move around. And here is the Atlantic Ridge, where the Earth is separating, and as the surface is separating, and North and South America are moving farther away from Africa. In these vent areas, we have what are called smokers. These are gases that are being emitted from the center of the Earth in the crustal area. And this video here shows you an image of what it looks like several thousand feet down with the hot air coming out, or the hot water coming out, bubbling, forming essentially a chimney. One of the chief scientists on this project is Bill Brazelton, a faculty member here in the School of Biological Sciences. When we begin to look at deep sea vents, we find a mechanism in which we could imagine life started to evolve. Coming out through these chimneys are hydrogen gas and hydrogen sulfide, energy-rich compounds. And these compounds give up electrons to form sulfur and water. And those electrons and energy can be used to reduce carbon dioxide into CO, into acids, and other compounds. The same is true for the conversion of nitrates and nitrites into ammonia, and together they can form biomolecules. What we have is a gradient here, a universal gradient, with energy coming in on the inside and the reactions taking place on the outer side of the chimney. So we have a situation very similar to the Urey experiment, the Miller-Urey experiment, except now we have a surface in which this reaction is taking place. Those are the three hypotheses. Central to each of the hypotheses is that these various compounds that are being formed from amino acids through nucleic acids and sugars need to aggregate. They need to have a surface upon which they can interact. One possibility for each of these hypotheses is that a reaction takes place in a charged clay mineral surface. So here we have a clay surface. It has a bit of a charge, and it would attract and hold molecules together so that they might interact and go from simple molecules to more complicated molecules. That could take place on land with clay mineral layers, or it could take place on vent walls, or it could take place on the surface of a meteorite. Perhaps the most favored hypothesis of the three today is that life began at these thermal vents with energy coming up, as I mentioned, in the form of hydrogen gas and hydrogen sulfide, interacting with carbon dioxide and other compounds on these chimneys, so that you have a pH gradient with the gases coming up on the inside at a relatively high pH, and the water outside of these vents being slightly acidic. So we have a big pH change associated with the reactions that are taking place on the inside of the wall, where the energy is, and the electrons being donated to reactions on the outer side of the wall. So let's stop and have a clicker question. Each of these three mechanisms explains the synthesis of biomolecules leading to life and provides a reliable energy source to synthesize the molecule. True or false? The answer is true. Each of these three possible mechanisms, lightning, cosmic UV energy, and thermal gases, could provide the energy needed to reduce carbon dioxide to more energy-rich compounds. Second question. Each of these three mechanisms explains the synthesis of biomolecules leading to the origin. Do they provide a reliable surface upon which the biomolecule reactions can take place? The answer is false. The soup is not a surface. It doesn't provide that hypothesis doesn't provide a mechanism whereby molecules can interact. Whereas those molecules could interact on the charged surface of a meteorite or on the thermal vent walls. During the early stages of the evolution of life, it is thought that the molecule RNA, ribonucleic acid, carried out most of the biochemical functions that are today handled by DNA and by proteins. RNA can have three key functions. It does, of course, have the ability to store information in the form of the amino acids, the nucleic acid sequences. It turns out that there is an enzymatic function associated with RNA, and RNA, of course, has the capacity to self-replicate. Neither DNA nor proteins can perform all of these functions, but RNA can. So the one hypothesis is that the world began with molecules, the primary information storing mechanism being RNA. Now, Carl Woese proposed that life was initially communal. We had all these reactions taking place on a surface, whether it's a clay surface or whether it's the sides of an undersea vent. And this would provide an opportunity for lots of innovation of new traits. Replicating was free because none of the units were separated from each other all were present on this surface, whether it's a vent wall or a clay particle. Okay? With that free exchange of information, we would call that a horizontal exchange of information. Eventually, it is thought that this horizontal exchange of information stopped, and that we had the creation of cells, which then became selfish. This is known as the Darwinian threshold. The threshold barrier was crossed when membranes were formed, and these consisted of lipid bilayers, such as we have today, because we now had a mechanism whereby we could enclose or separate the RNA and protein and other functions of one entity from the rest, so that we went from a position of horizontal information exchange to a vertical information exchange.